So, hello everyone. Thank you for taking your time off on a Monday evening to come to this session on an introduction to hospital pharmacy. Basically, this session will be going through how to apply for roles into hospital pharmacy. Um, there are some things that we'll go through this session that you probably wouldn't have expected from things such as there's no such thing as a CV, all the way to how to find jobs, the banding. But that will all be Kishan's remit. And to quickly let Kishan introduce himself, please take it away.
Yes, great. Thank you, Zahir. Thanks for having me as well. I'm glad to be here with you all. And like Zahir said, it's a Monday, so Monday blues are kicking in. I can see by the numbers, but hopefully we'll make your evening fun. So very quickly, just a little bit about myself. So I've a pharmacist for 10 years. Been in the hospital pretty much for a majority of those 10 years. My first few years were spent in clinical pharmacy, so really like kind of learning the skills and basics of hospital, and then gradually moved into more specialist pharmacy areas such as ITU and A&E, and then took a turn into leadership. So I started moving down the routes of education and training. So I started looking after trainee pharmacists, junior pharmacists, early career pharmacists, and yeah, from there I've had some fun time working with NHS England, GPHC, and most recently I was looking after the workforce development for the whole of Northwest London. So yeah, it's a little bit about myself, and what it's going to tell you is that I'm very biased and openly biased when it comes to hospital pharmacy. I spent, like I said, pretty much the whole of my career there, and I'm very passionate about what it can do, and it's lovely to see so many of you are interested in making that transition or getting an insight into hospital pharmacy. Thanks, I. So what I really want to do today is set the scene in terms of a little bit about hospital pharmacy, a little bit about where it sits, and then actually focus a little bit more on how to apply, what to expect, what that journey looks like to hospital pharmacy, how you progress, and then at the end we'll close off with any questions and answers that you guys may have. So hopefully that sounds good. And so yeah, I'm ready to go. So the first two things that I just wanted to touch on were just to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of when we talk about hospital pharmacy, what are we talking about? So as you all may know, healthcare in the UK is spoken about in three levels. So you have primary care, which is generally your first point of contact for any healthcare need. So that includes things like GPs, community pharmacists, dentists, opticians, etc. So your first point of contact, your primary point of contact. Then you have secondary care, which includes anything that requires accident and emergency care, planned and unplanned surgeries, mental health, etc. Often you will see hospitals will be referred to as secondary care. So that's why I just wanted to touch on it, because when people refer to secondary care, they mean hospitals, but actually secondary care encompasses a lot more. And finally, you get a level of care which is known as tertiary care. And tertiary care is more specialist services. So, for example, you may have heard of Great Ormond Street in London, which is a specialist for pediatric medicine. But when we look at hospital pharmacy, we kind of group secondary and tertiary together. So I won't differentiate for the promise of this presentation. It will apply to both secondary care hospitals and tertiary care hospitals. And actually, we won't differentiate. And actually, the recruitment process itself doesn't differentiate. So we've got that clear. And then we move on to what do we mean by an NHS trust? And this is just something I wanted to clarify before we dive deeper into hospital pharmacy. So NHS hospitals sit under a trust. So what a trust is, in essence, is just an organizational unit which covers a certain geographical area. So for example, if you may know Ealing, there's a hospital in Ealing called Ealing Hospital. However, if you look for a job termed Ealing Hospital, it might not appear on what we've discussed, what we when we look at the where to apply, it might not appear because Ealing Hospital actually sits within the trust for London Northwest University Healthcare. So why I wanted to bring that up is because within a trust you can have multiple different hospitals, or some trusts might just have one hospital, basically just a geographical area. So it's important to, when we start applying or thinking about where we want to apply, to look at your local trusts, look at which hospitals fall into it, and which sites you're actually applying for. Thank you, Zahir. Next slide, please. So let's go a little bit into hospital pharmacy. So As you can see, the first picture on the left is probably what a hospital pharmacy looked like in the 1950s. And it was very like apothecary, like making stuff kind of pharmacy vibes. So in the 50s, I actually have a colleague who retired recently, who was working in a hospital pharmacy in the 50s. And what they used to do is their job was to make things on the spot for patients that had been admitted to hospital. So, for example, a patient's been admitted to hospital for a dermatological condition, they would have to there and then mix hydrocortisone with a base and create a hydrocortisone cream. So that's really where hospital pharmacies started around the initiation of the NHS. Then we actually, as a society, started to realize, and as a medical model, started to realize pharmacists can play a huge role in patient care. So the last 30 to 40 years, the premise of pharmacy staff has been more around direct patient contact. So doing medication histories, doing medicines reconciliations, counseling patients on the ward, um, explaining things to patients, talking them through changes, teaching them how to use medicines. And that's kind of where pharmacy and pharmacy teams had a massive boom when these roles started coming to light and people started realizing what pharmacy staff can do within a hospital setting. And the final picture to our right shows what's been happening in the last 10 to 15 years. So, with the emergence of independent prescribing and advanced clinical practice, we now have pharmacists working independently. So, doing full medication histories, actually not even medication histories anymore, full medical assessments for patients that come to A&E. We have pharmacists running clinics, prescribing, deprescribing, monitoring. Um, so the roles have drastically expanded. And what I'm trying to show by this is that the direction hospital pharmacy has been going in. And actually, what I'm also trying to show is that pharmacists within hospital have been integral from the start. And within the NHS, pharmacists within a hospital will always make a large proportion of the supply of pharmacists. So I think currently there's maybe like 10,000 pharmacists or employed across all the NHS trusts. So it's always going to be a key pillar of employment, and it will always continue to be because the services are always expanding. Therefore, pharmacists will always be needed within this environment. Next slide, please. Ahead. Sorry, I think we might have missed. Oh yeah, there we go. So, roles of a pharmacist. Now, this I find quite of a paradox of a slide when I was putting it together, because the role of a hospital pharmacist varied. So when I started in hospital pharmacy, I could have guessed dispensary, I could have guessed medication reviews, I could have guessed patient counselling, and at a push, maybe I would have guessed ward round. But actually, when I got into hospital pharmacy, I realised the breadth of what it involves to be a hospital pharmacist. So this is a list I put together off the top of my head, and it's not limited, but hospital pharmacists are doing all of those things as we discussed, what we expected, plus things like stock management, formulary management, education and training, which is what I did for many years, research, trials, audits, medicine information, doing drug cost analysis, drug monitoring, manufacturing, cancer services, aseptics. It's endless. Electronic prescribing, information officers. So the role of a hospital pharmacist is very hard to pin down, but it involves many different um, facets to the role. And so you can say, in one sense, it's super diverse, and every week is very unique and challenging. And so, with that in mind, you can already start to guess. As a recruiter, someone who's interviewed for many roles in the NHS, I'm always looking for people who are adaptable and people who are inquisitive and willing to learn, because within the role of a hospital pharmacist, you're never going to know everything, regardless of how long you've been in the system. So it's more about showing that enthusiasm and willingness to grow, which I think is really important. So then you're probably thinking, Kishan, how do you do all of these things on one day? Isn't it impossible? Correct. So you might do a few of these on a particular day, but how it works, especially at entry level, is you are put on rotations. So you may do 3 months in the dispensary, followed by your next 3 months in, let's say, a surgical ward, followed by 3 months in medicines information, where you're giving out advice to doctors, other healthcare professionals, and GPs, and another 3 months in cancer services. So this is what we call a rotational post, where you move around different rotations. And basically, the aim of that is to build you into a competent and well-rounded pharmacist. And that's generally what happens. So if you ever see, we'll talk about where you enter and the entry levels. But when you look at like a junior early careers pharmacist in a hospital, that's generally what they'll be called, like a rotational pharmacist, where you move around, you get exposed to different areas, and help you build your operational understanding of a hospital pharmacy. Next slide, please. So now we know a little bit about, okay, hospital pharmacy, really varied, really hectic, it can be really fun, lots of different challenges. Like, what are we actually applying for? So to understand that, we need to understand about the banding system. So you need to understand it loosely. In the workbook that we've created, there's a lot more about this, but I'm going to touch on it loosely here. So in 2004, NHS produced something called a banding system, known as the Agenda for Change. And what it does, it kind of standardizes pay scales, but also roles and responsibilities expected at that level. And before that, it was a very sinister name. So, like for example, a junior pharmacist would be called a basic grade pharmacist, or newbie in essence. So to get rid of that kind of name calling, they kind of moved it into bands. So I noticed there's a few of you who are newly qualified and a few of you are trainee pharmacists. So I'll just quickly touch on how it looks, and what that journey might look like. So band five is the earliest band you can be for any type of pharmacist, and that is a trainee pharmacist. So as you apply through Oriel, if you're a trainee pharmacist currently in a hospital environment, you'll be a band five, and that is the title assigned to trainee pharmacist. So if you once you're qualified, the entry level pharmacist is called a band six pharmacist. And the jobs of these might be advertised in many different ways. So it might be called a rotational pharmacist, you might be called a clinical pharmacist, you might be called a junior pharmacist, you might be called a diploma pharmacist, which will all make sense. But in essence, what it's saying is band six is equivalent to early careers, year one to year three of your kind of journey. And there, really, what it's about is the job is focused on you developing. So it's focused on putting you through rotations, helping your understanding and helping you grow in that environment. So then as you move down into a band seven, that is now what we call, and when I say call, I'm talking about how, from my experience in 10 years, how we've titled these jobs. So a band seven is kind of what we call a senior clinical pharmacist. So here the responsibilities will be a bit more directly towards patient care, starting to be able to handle, multiple different areas, not specializing as such, but being able to tackle and take on a few more responsibilities. As you move into the realms of a band 8A pharmacist, now we're talking about specialist and advanced pharmacists. So here you would generally specialize. Whereas at band 6 and band 7, you wouldn't specialize. You would be kind of on a rotational program. At band 8A, you would probably be specializing. So, for example, a respiratory pharmacist or a cardiology pharmacist, or a cancer pharmacist. So this is generally where that happens, and you'd be expected to have advanced knowledge in that particular area. And as you then move up, I'm not going to go into them in detail, but looking at the 8Bs, 8Cs, that's when you're looking into senior management. You start looking at strategically managing larger teams. You start looking at the direction that going in. And so that's where those fit. But for the premise of this conversation, we're going to focus on band six entry level roles. The good news is for a band six entry level role, prior to what people think, you actually don't need any requirements. The only requirement when you're applying for a band six pharmacist role in a hospital is that you have a GPHC license. So once you pass the exam, or you have a trainee number and the application says we will accept trainee applications, as long as you have a GPHC license and you're set to finish the exam by the time of the employment, then you can apply for that role. Next slide, please, Zahir. So I'm hoping that makes sense. I don't know if there's any questions coming yet, but we'll have time for questions at the end for sure. So now we know, okay, what do we apply for? We're looking at entry level roles, looking at band six roles. We're looking at the type of terms: clinical pharmacist, junior pharmacist, rotational pharmacist. How do we apply? So NHS has made this job quite easy, actually. So there's a website which I hope you've all heard of. If not, then please do have a look at it over the next couple of days, called NHS Jobs. I highly recommend everyone makes an account on this. And what NHS Jobs is, it's a kind of amalgamation platform for all NHS hospitals across England. All their jobs appear on here. And that's for everyone: nurses, doctors, pharmacists, occupational therapists, physiotherapists. So it's a great like one-stop shop, almost like an Oriel, where you create an account, you can actually set up like a job search and say, notify me when these kind of jobs come up, or notify me when a job in this area comes up. So it's great, really, really great place to start. And actually, you might see a job advertised on a particular trust website. So let's say you want to apply to Charing Cross, which is a part of Imperial Trust, and on their website it shows there's a job available. Generally, the link when you click on it will take you to NHS Jobs to apply anyway, because NHS Jobs is kind of like the portal which employers receive the application off. So once you send your application through, that comes across to us, and then we can shortlist from there. So make an account on NHS Jobs, really, really important takeaway, and start getting used to what you're looking for. So play around with the search function. You can search, if you just type in pharmacist, you put a location, let's say London, Southampton, etc., and then you'll then bring up further filters like what band, etc. You can filter like that. So once you find a job you like, let's say I find a job at Charing Cross that I think looks good. Um, on the advert, you will see a few important details. You will see the closing date, which is really important because that's when you need to make sure your application is in by. You will see a job description and a job specification. And what that basically does outlines what the premise of the role is. Like I said, generally at band six level or entry level, it's quite similar. It will be to gain rotational experience, to understand how pharmacy works, to grow into a competent clinical pharmacist. So it will generally be quite similar, but you should read it because some of them come with separate, um, some of them come with different caveats. So, for example, is there an on-call service? Generally, at entry level, most pharmacists have to do an on-call service, so which could include anything like doing weekends on call or doing 1 week a month in the evening on call or something like that. So please do look into that. So you look into the job description, look into the job specification, and if you think you meet the criteria, then you can start your application. And it's great because everything's done on NHS Jobs. The application is also done on NHS Jobs. So it just takes you through to the next stage. And it's like you follow it through. So unlike private jobs you may have applied for previously, or you may think the standard way to apply for a job is a CV and a cover letter. So there's no real such thing like that on NHS Jobs. You don't just upload your CV and you don't upload a cover letter, but it covers similar things. So what will happen? You'll first be put up with some application questions, and those application questions you can almost think of like your CV because what they will ask for is things like your employment history, your qualification history, your GCSEs, your A levels, your university qualifications, your registration number. It will ask about your DBS clearances, all of that kind of stuff. So they're the kind of application questions. Quite straightforward, more to do with your personal aspects of yourself, like a CV. And the great news is that once you save that once on your profile, it's always saved. So it pre-populates. So for example, you do an application a week later, it will save it. Then what you have is a supporting statement. So your supporting statement is again, as you click through the application, you've done all your basic information. It will ask you to write a supporting statement. And the supporting statement is almost similar to a cover letter. So you can look at it that way. But what the supporting statement is looking for, this is your chance to show the employer why you are suitable for that role. And so a great way to tackle this is look at the job description, look at the job specification, look at what the trust is looking for, and then you can write about how you meet some of those criteria. So for example, the trust is very hot on going the extra mile for patients. You can write about a time you went the extra mile. You can talk about your previous work experiences and why you think that this role is correct for you. And this is really your chance to kind of show them why you should be shortlisted for an interview. On the workbook that we've put together, which is on live now on the Revised Pharma website, we have got a full guidance on supporting statements. It goes through prompts. It's even got a guided example of what a good supporting statement looks like. So if you wanted to delve in deeper to that, you can look into that. Next slide, please. So how it works, you do your application, you do your application questions, you do a supporting statement, and you submit on NHS Jobs. This is the great thing about NHS Jobs, it's a one-stop shop. Then what happens is that those applications then get received by the hiring manager. So if someone like myself, we then can shortlist based on all the applications we receive off this portal. And we shortlist, and what we shortlist to say is, do we want to interview this person or not, based on their qualifications and based on their supporting statement. So we'll read through it, look out for some key criteria, making sure that they could be a potential fit for our organization, and then we'll invite you to interview. So as we carry on, hope you can see the journey we're going on. As we carry on, what are we expecting in interviews? So generally, the interviews in secondary care or in hospitals are panel based. And what I mean by panel based is that it will generally be yourself sitting opposite panel of members. May that be two, three. If you're really unlucky, you might have four people sitting opposite you, and they will take it in turns to go through some questions and some tasks to kind of determine your competencies and whether you'd be a right fit for the role. So that's generally how it looks. I have seen every now and then there is more of an OSCE format to an interview at junior level, but it's the same type of questions. It's just split up into like OSCE stations, but the questions will be the same. I'm going to go into the types of questions, but very quickly, I'm actually going to go to the bottom and go to presentations first. If you get invited for an interview, you'll get an automated email from NHS Jobs, which say, congratulations, you've been invited for an interview. It's really important to read that email because not always, but sometimes they will ask you to prepare a presentation for the interview. And I don't want to say it'll be simple because presentations are never simple, but for an entry level role, it will be a title which is quite generic. So, like, what do you think the challenges to this role will be? Prepare a 5 minute PowerPoint presentation, which goes through the challenges, or which goes through why do you think that Imperial Health have these trust values, for example, or why do you think medicine's optimization and medicine's counseling is important? So please do look out for that. Every now and then you'll get an email and it will say, please prepare this presentation. And then in that case, you will need to make sure stick within the time limit. You send it back to the hiring manager a day or two before, and then make sure you practice that and rehearse that. Like I said, not always common at entry level. It definitely is the higher up you move within the NHS banding system. It almost becomes mandatory at 80 and above, but keep an eye out for that. So, okay, now let's get into the bulk of what to expect in the interview. So there's no, in essence, what I'm trying to say that there's no, these categories that I'm about to present to you are something that I've kind of categorized after, oh, it's embarrassing to say, I've probably done close to 1,000 interviews of trainee pharmacists and junior pharmacists. And what I've done is I've kind of gone and broken them up into general types of categories that I think they fit into. So yeah, this is not a universal model. It's just what I think you need to know and what you should expect from an interview. So let's break down the question. So the first common type of question you're likely to get is questions to do with getting to know you. So I'm sure you've all come across these kind of questions. It can be sometimes annoying when someone says, "Oh, tell me about yourself." Quite broad-ended questions, or "Why do you want this role?" Or like, "What makes you suitable for this role?" So these questions really what the recruiters are trying to do, and what the hiring manager is trying to do, is get to know you, to understand you as a character, to understand your motives, to understand why you're here, like what's the purpose of you being here. And they're also trying to get a feel for you as a person, because what's really important in a hospital is you're never working alone. Like in my last role that I worked in, the pharmacy department was 400 people. The one before that, 160. The one before that, 310. So you're always working with people. So it's really important at this stage for the hiring manager to think, will this be the right character to fit into our team? So this is a chance for you to show your personality. And there's no right or wrong answers in these types of questions. There is, like I said, I've done 1,000 of these, and I've never marked someone down or up for saying being authentic. So talk about your hobbies, talk about what you like to do, talk about your character. It's your chance to kind of show them like the kind of person you are. Also a chance to show off a little bit that you've done your research. So when someone asks you a question like, "Oh, why do you want to apply for this role?" It's good to show off that you've done your research about the organization. So one of the basic tasks I give in the workbook as well is that go onto the trust website and look at their key values, look at their ethos, look at their priority over the next 10 years. And you can bring that up and say, "Hey, one of the things I really like about your organization is that you value honesty above everything, or you value equality and diversity." It's a chance for you to almost show off a little bit that you've done your research. So that's one category of questions, and it's always going to happen. So you should always expect something along those lines. And then we move into competency-based questions. And why I put this category second above clinical questions is back to what I said. within a hospital, you get the sickest patients. People don't come to hospital unless they're really sick. So yes, the clinical complexity of a patient in the hospital is much higher than the clinical complexity of a patient you might see in primary care. So will your clinical knowledge need to be good? Yes, absolutely. But do we expect it to be good when you start with us? It doesn't have to be incredible. It just has to have, like we said, the premise to show that you're willing to learn and you're willing to grow. So there will be clinical questions, but before that, and more importantly, we look at competency-based questions. So what I mean by competency-based questions, and I'll give you some examples and it will make sense. Like we spoke about earlier, I might ask a question like, tell me about a time when you've gone the extra mile for a patient. Tell me about a time where you've shown good teamwork. Tell me about a time where you've worked well under pressure. So as you can see, by those questions, I'm listing out for all those competencies. Is this person a good team player? Does this patient care about this pharmacist care about patient care and go above and beyond? Is this pharmacist resilient? Will they manage under pressure? I might even give you a task, which is like, here's a list of things that are happening in your day. Prioritize them for me. And I've given an in-depth example in the workbook and how to answer that. But in essence, what I'm looking for by asking you that question is, will this individual be able to prioritize and manage their workload? So those are really, really important questions, and you're almost guaranteed to get, I'll say, 3 to 4 of those questions in the hospital pharmacy interview. Then we move on to clinical questions and tasks. Like I said, very important, but not the be all and end all. Because at an entry level, you you will have so much support and training. It's more about the willingness. As you move higher up, then yes, your clinical expertise needs to be sound, and you almost have to become an expert when you're applying for some of the senior roles. At entry level, you just need to show that yes, you have some level of clinical safety, some level of clinical, but most importantly, your processes are correct. So let me give you an example. You might get presented with an outpatient prescription, and the hiring manager might say, um, "Hi, Zahir, please can you? I'm going to give you a minute. Please tell me what you think of this outpatient prescription and what like bring back any pharmaceutical issues you might see." So great, there's a chance for you to show off your clinical skills, see what you've noticed on the prescription. Really important to go through both the legal and the clinical aspects, talk through your processes. One thing I find is a lot of people, when presented with a task like this, they will maybe give me the headline answer. Oh, there's an interaction between methotrexate and ibuprofen. Okay, great, you picked up the red flag, but I want to hear your thought process. So I think how I would like to see that answer is something like, so I noticed that this patient's come in for X, Y, and Z. This prescription's come from the rheumatology clinic. It is signed, it is legal, it is in date. And then now when I'm looking at allergies, there's no allergies. And then I picked up on the interaction. So what that shows me is your thought process, that you're thorough in the way you kind of navigated it. A lot of people do that in their head, and this is when I really advise do it out loud. Like speak out your thought process to the interviewer. Another type of task you could get in a clinical task is an inpatient drug chart, and it won't be something that's like super in depth. Normally, these exercises are between 5 to 10 minutes at maximum. Um, and I always get asked a question, and from loads of kind of university students that I speak to, is what if I don't know? What if I come across something that looks a bit complicated for me? Let's say some of you might have heard of, hopefully all of you heard of something called dalteparin, which is a antiplatelet. Sorry, what am I talking about? An anticoagulant, and it's given to most patients in hospitals due to the risk of a VTE. So if you're not aware of, like, say, the dosing, for example, but you recognize that it's a different dose per week, you're not going to get penalized if you don't know what the right answer is. But what we'd like to see is you to say, hey, I noticed this patient is on dalteparin. I know it's weight-based dosing. I'm not particularly sure, so I would check the trust guidelines, or I would check the BNF to make sure, or the SPC to make sure that this is the right for that weight. So what that's showing us, showing me in particular, is that hey, you might not have the knowledge yet of memorizing the dose, but you know where to look. I think that's really, really important. So those are the type of clinical questions you might get. You will occasionally get questions, actually, most times you'll get a question at this level on professional achievements. And so what I mean by this is always have an example of like an audit that you've done, a service improvement that you've done, a change that you've made. Um, so just kind of highlighting your professional achievements thus far. And sometimes these can even be personal achievements. They might ask you what your proudest moment is. It might ask you, where the biggest development you've seen, or where you've taken on some feedback and made a change to your practice. So this is really about like, what achievements and strides have you made in a professional environment? Um, and again, there's no right answer. What we're looking for here is to show an understanding of, of growth and an understanding of your processes and be able to articulate those processes. The last type of question that I've categorized as development needs. So something about what we looked at earlier and why I wanted to go through the roles of a hospital pharmacist is because I wanted to show you that no matter how long you spend in a hospital pharmacy, you will never know everything. So I've been working in hospitals, like I said, for 10 years. Out of the roles that we looked at in slide 2 or 3, I probably can confidently say I can do 5 or 6 of them. Um, and why I'm saying that is because it's really important for you, the hospital pharmacist, to understand your limitations. You are never going to know, like, for example, I'm an education and training lead. I'm not going to know everything about infusions for a cardiac patient in a cardiac arrest. I'm not going to know how to manipulate all the medicines for a child to give them in a liquid formula. But what I will know is the resources to use to get to that information. So it's very important that you understand that you're never going to know everything. And interviewers are out to see that awareness from you. That's why they ask questions around development needs. Questions like, tell me what support you might need in this role. Tell me, uh, tell me what areas you might think you might enjoy the least. And what they're looking for here is honesty, true honesty, where it says, hey, you know what? I'm great at the dispensing side because I've got great background in dispensary and I can handle the pressure and I can handle the large number of prescriptions. But one thing I'm not so comfortable with is intravenous infusions and how to advise on infusion rates because I've not seen them. And going forward, how I like to tackle this is maybe I can like sometimes shadowing an ITU pharmacist or someone who works in critical care to understand infusions a little bit better. So that's what they're looking for is really that awareness to say, hey, I don't know everything. I accept that there's certain parts I'm not going to be so great at. There's certain parts that I will be great at. And I'll give you a great example. So recently, most NHS trusts have moved to electronic prescribing. So mostly everything's electronic now. We're getting rid of paper drug charts and paper notes. And a lot of people struggled with transitioning to electronic prescribing. So if that's something that you think you're good at IT, you're good with learning new systems, great, bring it up here. Say, yeah, look, I'm great with that, with the technology side, and I think I'll be really good at this. However, there's certain things that I think I'll need support with. So it's your chance to be honest. And it always comes through. So yeah, those are the types of questions that I've found are the most common. And I've done a fair share. And that's kind of helping you set a background into what you might expect interviews. So now let's say you're successful, you've got the job, wonderful, celebrate, great. You sort out all your mandatory training, etc. Oh, I did want to mention that you actually don't need any prior training, like I said, for an entry level pharmacist. What happens is that you do all the mandatory training and stuff when you join the trust. They will give you a login and you can do it all. Maybe they might send it to you a week or two before you start, but you don't need to do it prior to have any like additional courses, just a GPHC registration. So once you're in, now what happens? Are you just how do you like what's the hoo-ha? Why does everyone love hospital pharmacy? And I think this is where the strength of hospital pharmacy comes in, is the fact that there's so much emphasis on support and growth within the hospital. Imagine they hire people like myself and teams like myself with education training just to look after the development of people. Like how crazy is that? Like how many industries do you see where there's like a team just dedicated to helping other people grow? And that's been my job for the last 5 years. So how does it work? So what happens is that generally there's a benchmark in the head of the senior leaders of what qualifications you need to do to move through the ranks. And I'll quickly draw that out for you here on the list on the left. So if you join as a junior pharmacist, a basic grade pharmacist, you will be enrolled 9 times out of 10 onto a diploma, which is on-the-job training, generally in clinical pharmacy. And what this really does, it helps you hone in on your clinical skills. So, for example, maybe one day every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, you'll have a study day, and that might be focused on, say, cardiovascular medicine, respiratory medicine, observations, and it really like boosts your clinical confidence when it comes to pathophysiology, prescribing, medicine, understanding how everything works. And it goes hand in hand. So it's like on the job. So you'll be enrolled onto a diploma, so you'll be working your normal hours and have a study day every now and then. And also maybe there'll be like assessments that you have to do on behalf of the university diploma with, but they'll get signed off by people at work. So it's like an on-the-job kind of training. And it's really important to check actually. So most places fund a diploma. Most hospitals will fund a diploma for training for junior pharmacists, but it's important to clarify that interview stage to check. Okay, will a diploma be funded? Like I said, 9 times out of 10, actually nine times out of 100, it will be. And it's just get that checked. And also, you can have a look at when you interview is what diploma they use. There's loads of different providers. So, for example, I did mine at University College London. So once you've done your diploma in clinical pharmacy, generally they anywhere between 18 months to 3 years, you're looking at the next step. So like we spoke about, looking to be a more senior rotational pharmacist or a band 7 pharmacist, um, where you've got a bit more, understanding of how to really look after these patients and make a significant impact on patient care. Like start attending the ward rounds with the doctors, start making contributions, like real contributions that impact patient care. Then unfortunately, I think actually none of you guys, if you're trainees this year, but for the following years, 2026 onwards, they will come out with independent prescribing qualification. But don't worry, because there's still many, many pharmacists within the NHS who don't have an independent prescribing qualification. But you will be expected to, once your diploma is done, start looking at independent prescribing, especially if you want to stay in a clinical environment. And this is great because you being able to prescribe is such an advantage within a hospital because you can edit things yourself, amend things yourself, and then you can start thinking about further roles. And now we're talking about specialist roles at 8A and above, where you can manage your own clinics. You can run a hypertension clinic, you can run an anticoagulant clinic, you can, run a Parkinson's clinic. So this is why it's important at that next level to get an independent prescribing and then helps you move into a specialist role. Once you kind of have done your clinical training, which can go on forever, but let's just say your basic clinical training, which is your diploma and your IP, you will then hopefully be at a stage where you're band 7, potentially a band, and we will start looking at enrolling you on supervision and training courses. Why this is so important? Because you know how I mentioned within hospital, the culture is all about growing and developing people. So it's almost like you're paying it back. Like I said, if there's 400 staff at any one time, there's always going to be juniors. There's always going to be new staff. So now you're starting to develop your kind of management skills, and can you now train and help put on supervision and training courses? Once you have kind of done that and you now are working at specialist level, so 8A and above, you can start doing specialist masters, which are often funded by the NHS. So if I give an example, 3 people within the last month just completed a master's, one in critical meds, one in nutritional medicine because they're a gastropharmacist, gastroenterology pharmacist, and one of my colleagues did it in genomics, a master's in genomic medicine because they're an antimicrobial lead and they want to use genomics to help determine antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial patterns. So the options are limitless depending on your role. But this is when your role matters as opposed to, like, for example, if you're a rotational role, you won't be doing a specialist master's. But if you're in a specialist role, you do that. The routes, like myself, I didn't really go down a specialist master's route, but what I did, I went down the leadership courses route. So I've done multiple leadership courses within the NHS, which kind of gear you up to becoming a team leader, gear you up to managing larger teams. And even actually interesting, some people, especially once they move to the senior positions, are looking at even MBAs, which you can do through the NHS and within hospital pharmacy. And on the right, you'll see a career progression pathway, which shows you a little bit about what we discussed. I actually put this together with University of Leicester, and it talks about the different bands, what the titles might look like, and actually on the right hand side completely, it talks about the different types of qualifications you might have to do to get there. But I've summarized them in our discussion just there. Next slide, please. So that's in essence for today. I think my jaw's actually hurting, and I think you guys have been listening for too long. In essence, in terms of the introduction to start how you start thinking about hospital pharmacy. Like I mentioned earlier, we have released a workbook on the introduction to hospital pharmacy, which goes into a lot more detail in terms of all the topics that we've covered today. It has examples of supporting statements, has examples and worked guides for interview questions, talks about pay scales, insurance, and it also goes through key resources into a bit more detail. So yeah, if it interests you and you think, hey, you know what, like Kishan's inspired me to do hospital, then great. If you think, oh, Kishan, this scared me of hospital, maybe still read the workbook. It might help you settle some of those fears. But yeah, I think that's it from me. And I guess Zahir, we're happy to take any questions now. We're happy to hang around and take any questions.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Kishan. So someone even privately messaged me whilst you were speaking and was like, "Did Kishan say he interviewed 1,000 people?" And my response is, "Well, yes, he's the pro at pharmacy interviews and knowing exactly what to look out for hiring people for um, hospital pharmacy roles." And you'll be glad to know the person who actually made this intro to hospital pharmacy handbook was Kishan. So we decided Kishan would probably be one of the best people to create this. Revised Pharma Clinicals, we're all about quality. That's why we got Kishan on board. And this workbook, what it does, it basically goes, even if you're not fully, well, not at all clued up on how to get into hospital pharmacy. By the end of it, you will be. And as we said, the workbook contains um, everything that we covered today, essentially, but as well as an example supporting statement. So if you don't know what a supporting statement looks like, we've got one which is written by someone who's, again, interviewed thousands of people. Interview style questions with answers, examples with guides. Um, Again, we spoke about pay scales, insurance, and key resources as well. So what we're doing up until the end of April, some of you may have already seen the intro to hospital pharmacy on our website. What we're going to be doing as an introduction offer is going to stay at £20. And then from the 1st of May onwards, it will go up to just fractionally to £25. But that's just our little intro offer. It's got 20% off, and that can be found on revisedpharma.com. If you go to the store and then you go to employment, it will be there. But taking it to, again, thanking you for coming to today's session. But if you've got any questions for Kishan, so someone's already asked, as a trainee in community, is there a specific time of the year roles or jobs open up to look out for?
Yes, of course. Great question. So technically, on NHS jobs, an employer can release a job at any time of the year. Okay, so that's why it's really important to set up alerts. However, being in the roles that I've been in, there is hot times during the year. So what happens is generally, um, new pharmacists generally start in September when it comes to hospital cycle, because you can imagine the trainee pharmacists all finish in about July time, and so from September, once their results are out in August, they will look to onboard new junior pharmacists. So what I would say is that the key recruitment times are often February, March, April, can because what they're doing is they're trying to fill their posts for saying, hey, you're a trainee pharmacist. Once you qualify, we'd like to offer you a job. So then you can secure your job before you've done your exam, you get your results, and then you start in September. But that doesn't mean that it stops there. So they do that as a round one. And then often as a round two during the summer, they will go out again. Depending on how many people they manage to recruit in round one, they will generally go out again in summer. So the months of June, July, August, when people have got their results, and actually September as well, just post results. And those people will generally start in December time, depending on how quickly you can onboard. So the answer is no, in the sense that there isn't a specific time. They can advertise any time, but there is hotspots throughout the year where you'll see it generally aligns with the trainee pharmacist cycle. So a few months before the trainee pharmacist year is about to finish, and then in the summer just before the results are up. So that was hopefully that answers the question.
Brilliant. Then we've got da-da-da. Does working at outpatient pharmacy increase your chance getting into inpatient? Do they do clinical screening for chemo drugs?
Yeah,
Really
yeah.
useful question.
I think I understand what you're asking. So, yeah, yes, it does. Because if you work in an outpatient pharmacy within a hospital, it shows that you understand already the types of medicines the types of products that you might be dealing with within a hospital pharmacy. So yeah, it shows that. It shows you can handle the kind of footfall and the pressure that comes within working within a hospital pharmacy, even though it's outpatients. So yeah, of course it does. You should really hone in on those experiences on your supporting statement, especially if you've screened for chemo drugs already. That's already showing that you can screen at a level which is already quite advanced. So it will definitely work in your favor. But actually, on that point, it's important to note that to check whether your hospital that you're applying for has a separate inpatient and outpatient. So for all the hospitals I've worked at, you have to do both. Like there's an inpatient area and an outpatient area where you serve the public. But some hospitals, what they do, they outsource their prescriptions. So you might have like a Lloyd's at the front of the hospital, which does outpatient. But definitely, it definitely helps. But what I would say is that I don't want to discourage anyone because actually, even if you've worked in community pharmacy, which is not in a hospital setting, let's say a Lloyd's on a high street, you can still hone into those experiences like we spoke about and hone into those soft skills to help you stand out.
Cool, amazing. Um, and then just quickly, someone's leading on the previous question before this one. If they're sitting their exam in November, when's the best time to apply?
Yeah, good question. So there's two things you can do here. So if you see a job advert come out in the summer, let's say August, September, and you're doing your exam in November, there's not on NHS jobs, anytime you see a job, it has a contact of the lead recruiter. You can actually message them or email them and say, hey, I'm due to sit my exam in November. Would you still consider my application? Because what generally happens is when we recruit within the NHS, we expect like a 3 to 4 month lag when it comes to onboarding anyway. So sometimes what they might do is interview you and say, conditional to you passing your exam, say your exam results come in December, you can start in January. So there's never like a bad time. You can always just reach out and say, is this suitable for someone who hasn't got the qualification? Some will obviously say only looking for registered pharmacists. Some will say open to trainee pharmacists. And then I guess if you do sit your exam in November, like I said, jobs come out all year round. So if you sit your exam in November and you get your results in December, like I said, by February, March, they're already looking at the next recruitment cycle. So you wouldn't have to wait too long.
Cool. Um, all right. And then the next question. So someone's asked privately, if you apply for a rotational pharmacist role, would that affect the possibility of me becoming a cancer specialist pharmacist in the future, or does that not matter? Assume it wouldn't
No, it
matter.
doesn't matter at all. Actually, if you're at entry level, you wouldn't be able to go into a cancer specialist role. And actually, we want to see that you understand the operational structure of a hospital pharmacy, like all the different facets to it. And then once you've grounded in those like basic parts of dispensary, working on a ward, working, with patients, working in a clinic, then you can start applying for specialist roles. I think initially it's just about grounding, getting your further education in, and then looking at specializing.
Cool. Amazing. Um, and then so I'm gonna mix two questions together. Would shadowing make a difference? And then someone's also asked, would I be able to apply for some experience in hospital before applying? So I suppose those two questions is basically
Yeah.
asking, should you get experience beforehand and will it make a difference?
So I'm going to be honest here. So what we're looking for and why shadowing does help some people and why it can be beneficial is because we want people who understand what hospital pharmacy is do and not like, be like, whoa, there's such thing as on call, or whoa, there's such thing as rotations, or oh, like there's a trust, like you can't be startled by that. It shows that you're not ready mentally for a hot role in hospital. So there's two ways you can do this. Yes, shadowing can help because it helps you understand that. Or two, you can speak to people, and even attending something like today will show that you have insight into what you're applying for. And I think that's where the whole shadowing can help, and getting some experience can help because you know exactly what you're getting yourself in for. But I don't think it's impossible. I've hired people who've had no experience, but who have done the due diligence to look into what a role in hospital pharmacy looks like. So when I ask them, hey, why do you want this role? They're able to articulate this is the different facets that attract me to hospital pharmacy.
Cool. Then going into the next one, what is the difference between basically working in a hospital and locum work?
Yep.
Is there training
Okay, good
provided?
question. Simple answer to that is if you work as a locum, you won't be put on like a developmental pathway. So you'll be brought in just to do a specific job. So let's say you're locuming at equivalent of a band 7 or 8. You'd be expected to, let's say, cover the acute wards, but you won't get the benefits in terms of like putting you on a development pathway, putting you on a diploma. They wouldn't probably fund any training for you as a locum, in terms of IP management, etc. Those opportunities will generally go to those on a permanent role. The permanent employees will kind of have a team of people looking after their progression, whereas as a locum, you're in to do a job like you are in any other field of pharmacy. So your development won't be, they won't fund your development as much. But if that's okay for some people, there's no right or wrong. Like I've locumed for periods of my life as well when just, wanted to take a break and not worry about um, going home at 5 and not having to carry any work with me. So
Mhm. Okie dokes. Now, someone's long-winded. If I do my IP and my clinical diploma self-funded while I'm a community pharmacist, can I apply for Band 7 straight away? Or even with IP and clinical diploma, I have to start from Band 6? She's doing the
great,
IP.
great question, Sarah. So you actually can apply for a band 7 straight away. So what you need to look at is when you look for a band 7 role. So let's say you feel like you've got the right experience to go straight in at band 7. And I think someone who's got a clinical diploma and an IP should be thinking about a band 7 role for sure. Um, you read the remember we spoke about this as a person specification, and it will say on there, band 7 required completion of diploma, required starting an IP or whatever. So then you can benchmark yourself and say, actually, I've got my diploma, I've got my IP. Yes, I might not have the hospital experience, but I think I have adequate other experience to take me in to a band 7 role. What I would say is going straight from diploma, say you did your diploma in IP and community and you went for a band 8A role, it might be a bit harder. And the reason is because at 8A, like I said, you're specializing in a certain area. So unless you've got a lot of experience in that, let's say in anticoagulants, it's unlikely that you'll get a role like that. But definitely, if you've got a diploma in IP, have a look at the job specification, and I advise you probably could go for a band 7 straight away. Yes.
Cool. Awesome. Um, and how can you apply for a clinical diploma self-funded?
So I'm not sure but what I think you're trying to say is that can you apply for it without being associated to a trust? Not necessarily. Some diplomas, especially the ones hospitals put you on, are hospital specific. So you have to be working within a NHS hospital provider. So for example, the one I did at UCL, you need your trust to sponsor you. Even if it's not financially, they sponsor you as to say, hey, you're working here. You can self-fund it. So what happens sometimes, say for example, you do have a job in a hospital, but they're not doing a diploma or they're doing a diploma which you want to use a different provider. Yes, you have the option to self-fund, but that's a conversation that you need to have with the education and training lead. It varies depending on a trust. So for the few hospitals that I've managed, I've chosen the supplier. So for example, one of them I chose Cardiff, the other one I chose UCL, and another one I chose Reading. So I choose a supplier depending on what I think is the best fit for that region and that cohort. But it's a conversation you need to have with your employer individually.
Okie dokes. Um, that's brilliant. And then hospitals offer visa sponsorships, I'm assuming. Yeah, that's the
Correct. Yeah.
that's
Hospitals offer tier two visa sponsorship. Yeah.
yeah. Whew, I think this is a bit too much of a political one. With NHS trying to go private in future, scrapping some of the workforce in NHS sector, do you think it's going to affect pharmacist opportunities in the future? I mean, even if it's private or not, you're going to need pharmacists. I
Mm,
actually met someone yesterday at the pharmacy business conference. He was a pharmacist in a private hospital in Harley Clinic. So I assume you still need a farm.
yeah. I think uh, exactly what you're saying is correct. So like we said, like I showed you that diagram of how pharmacist roles in hospitals have evolved since the 1950s. It's it's not decreasing. Like I said, it's a huge employer. So whether it's in the NHS or outside the NHS, there is private hospitals as well. Pharmacists will be needed in those sites regardless. Someone's going to have to do the history. Someone's going to have to do the medicines management. Someone will have to do all of those roles that we discussed earlier. But also, I wouldn't. I know there's a whole shift towards NHS moving towards private. But from someone who's there and been on the front line for the last 10 years, it doesn't feel like it's going anywhere. So I wouldn't worry about that yet. I would just think about where you want to go and what experiences you want to gather.
Mm.
And then if the wind changes, then we'll sail with it.
And realistically, if worst case scenario did go private, it would probably do better for your pay package, wouldn't it? Um,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that's not why we're here, but realistically, it would probably work out better for healthcare professionals. Um, so already spoken about shadowing beforehand and getting experience. Um, do you have any advice on how to succeed as a band six
Mm.
rotational pharmacist? I mean, I'd say, yeah, use our course,
Yeah,
get onto our course. So obviously today's was all just advice on um, kind of giving you a bit of background information on what um, applying for hospital pharmacy looks like. But then Kishan has worked with us to create, and actually sometimes it's just better to show than talk about it, isn't it? So let me
and that information's all on there about how to succeed as a band six, like kind of what soft skills that you need or we think you need to have a good career in hospital, especially as a rotational.
employment. Wait for it to load. And it essentially covers, I mean, I'd say it's pretty comprehensive, where it comes to like even examples of um, outpatients questions with like guide answers, example interview questions, interview presentations, all the shebang, essential skills, um, kind of what else? Yeah, for the interviews. So like loads of different types of tips, questions, um, how to apply for jobs where you're looking at what to expect, supporting statement, an example of a supporting statement. Essentially, everything that you could want to know is on this course. So if you are interested, I mean, it doesn't expire. Once you have this course, you have it. So whether you're looking at getting it now for once you finish training year, you'll probably just save yourself 20 £5 as opposed to buying it after April. So yeah, that's my top tip for getting into band six. But other than that, Kishan, do you have anything else to add?
No, I guess just want to say thank you to all. I think it's nice to see so much interest in, and it is a very challenging but gratifying career to work in hospital pharmacy. If you're thinking about the plunge, just take it. Like you're not going to lose anything. Take the plunge. Uh, and if you don't like it, that's fine. But I think it's an experience that if you've got an itch for it, you should do it. Um, and just don't be put off by thinking, oh, like the clinical skills need to be top tier. They do, but they don't need to be straight away. Like, and one of the things I guess that we're speaking about is advice is just be flexible, be open to learning, and if you have that drive and desire, you'll come across well, and you'll succeed.
Essentially. Well, with that being said, we are now at the hour mark. So thank you everyone for coming. If you do have any other questions, do reach out. And again, Kishan, thank you so much for doing this presentation and for producing this amazing pack. But yeah, other than that, I hope everyone has an amazing rest of your Monday evening, and hopefully you can kind of sign out and relax for the rest. Unless you're a trainee, get back to revision, I suppose. No, I'm joking. Um, you've you've kind of like done your work for today. Um, but yeah, we'll just leave it there, shall we? So thank you again, everyone, for coming. And we hope to hear from you soon. Take care.
Yes, thanks all. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.